Okay, well, my first guest, it's kind of interesting, my first podcast, because it's not about me taking the time to have a conversation or being the guide of the podcast. It's more about my friend Melicent, who's sitting across from me, I guess on Zoom today or live. Hello, my friend. Really kind of trying to introduce me. I know you don't know me at all, but my goal and purpose in this world is to empower. And what I'd like to do in this episode today is really have her ask me a lot of questions as why I'm here and what we're trying to accomplish with the Nancy perspective and see where we can flow. So I want to welcome my friend Melicent to the table.
Hi.
Hello. Before we start, I do want to tell you a little bit about her. Melicent and I have kind of had the same mom for the last little while. At one point, my mom worked at Medtronic. And Melicent was the PR guru, I would say, with Medtronic. And at the same time, my mom was my mom. So as we learned and grew together, she learned and grew with my mom on one side in the work realm. And maybe I grew and, developed on the other side with my mom. What would you say about how we know each other?
Well, it's funny because that's a perfect description.
Yeah.
I knew about you.
Yeah.
For so long.
Yeah.
Before I actually finally got to meet you this summer.
Yeah.
Which was awesome. And it's a different relationship, obviously, to have a work mom and a work daughter.
Yes.
And so we would actually give each other advice. On how do I deal with my mom? Or there's the situation with one of her daughters and wanted some advice. So that was really nice. But it always felt like there was something missing because I hadn't actually met you in person.
Yeah.
And when your mom mentioned that you had written this book, I was cautious about
I remember that.
Getting involved.
I know you were.
A lot of people write books.
Yeah.
But when I had a chance to actually read a preview, I was blown away and thought everybody should be reading this book. Many people could benefit from it. And I was so excited that I got a chance to meet with you more and discuss that book. And then for this podcast, which I think is a brilliant extension of the book, a way for people to hear empowering stories. I'm looking forward to listening to it and sharing it with other people whom I think can benefit from it. So,
well, thank you for saying that. And I think, I want to chat a little bit about the book and the podcast. And I think that's the goal of today. I've been on quite the journey. We all have. And, in my life, I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot, not in the way that I thought I would. And I think when I thought about writing this book 3 years ago, I started to put pen to paper and just flew through my journey the way that I could. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, about a year and a half ago, when my publisher or editor came to me to help me write it, it all came together. And it's amazing when it all comes together. And then again, you're sitting on the side of you got it and you opened it and you felt something. I was really nervous to send it to you because I know who you are. I know your time is valuable and precious, and we're similar and yet different. So I was nervous about what you would say when you read it. And yet here we are. And I've been very grateful for you being open to even help me get to where I am right now.
And what's interesting is when your mom retired, that was actually the beginning, I think, of your journey.
It was.
I knew a little bit of the beginning, but why don't we start there? Because people listening may not have read the book yet.
That's right.
It might not even be out yet.
It's not even out yet. It's out in February.
It depends on when they listen.
Yep, that's true. That is true.
Maybe the first podcast for somebody in a year or so.
Yep.
But can we start at the beginning? So
sure.
Before there was a book, before there was a podcast, there was an experience. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So like everyone else, I had a journey, a vision, and a goal. And, I went through university with a plan to come out, to get married, to get the job, to have the house, and have the life. And I was told that how driven you are leads to how successful you are. And so every ounce of myself was put into society's plan and my goal. And as I went about that and achieved these moments in time, it was becoming clear to me that I was achieving them, but there was something missing in my life. And over time, I didn't know what that missing piece was, but I can tell you that in my journey as I got married and then I had children, that's when it started to hit me. There was this health issue that creeped in for me. These moments that I wasn't listening, but my health was certainly yelling at me. And so although I was doing the plan and living the dream and had the job of my dream at Bayer, doing the national trainer role and feeling super passionate about it, I was really lost because I wasn't feeling well. I was sick. My body was yelling at me, but yet we're told to keep going. So in 2015, I couldn't keep going anymore because I was at the top of my game with my kids and my life and my plan, and I was checking every box that society said, but I could barely walk some days. I could barely function. I was in brain fog all the time. I was working out 5 days a week, but still feeling really exhausted and burnout, that feeling of burnout that I didn't know. So I had this body that was yelling and this mind that was ignoring. So the blessing came for me when, I'd been through multiple doctor visits and multiple times where they told me I was okay, and yet I didn't feel okay. And the blood work kept coming back normal, but yet I wasn't normal anymore. And I was angry at home. I was frustrated in life, and I just wasn't that person. It was like I was faking who I was on the outside, or on the inside and the outside.
And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
And I think this is when I started to hear your mom was freaking out.
I know she was.
And I'm sure you were.
I was scared.
Yeah. And I think you were, if I remember correctly, on a lot of medications.
I was on 10 medications a day. I've been blessed to be in the pharma world my whole life. And the blessing of that is knowing so much, but the curse is knowing so much, right? So we go to the doctor to get help. The doctor gives us a pill. That pill helps us, but then gives us more symptoms. So I was also in that cycle, right? Where, so many people know that cycle. You get sick, you go to the doctor, you get a pill, you feel better, but then something else happens, and then you create that cycle. And then the more you sit in that cycle, whether it's a pain cycle, a pill cycle, whatever, the more you get.
And what impact was that having on your husband and your kids?
I was acting like it wasn't having an impact. I mean, at work, I was doing work-life balance interviews. People were amazed by my productivity. Like it blows me away of what I was giving to work. And I know we understand that. We give everything to work. But my at-home life was really failing. My at-home life was full of two beautiful children at the time, 2 and 4, that were crying every day, that were tired every day, that were, as I know now, mirror reflecting the inner self of my own self and my own feelings that I was ignoring. My marriage was as good as I could make it, but I was building that space further and further because I was so tired and so frustrated and not myself, and not wrong or right, but my husband at the time didn't know how to manage it. And I understand that because it wasn't his to manage either, right? It really was a part of my journey, but that gap was getting larger and larger at family, and my family life, despite the fact that no one knew, wasn't really good because I wasn't really good.
Yeah.
Right.
And then something, your mom kind of stepped in, right?
I think to this day, if I were to say to the world what the whole shift of my life was the day my mom decided to bring me to the Mayo Clinic in the US. And I think that was the life-changing moment. I thought I was going there to get a diagnosis of something serious. I really did. I don't know that I felt I was going to come back with a different perspective of life. But I arrived there scared shitless, and we sat there, and that whole week was profound to me. If our healthcare system really acknowledged what they're doing and did it that way, it might be very different for so many. I saw 7 specialists over that week. They all sat together as a team. They all looked at me as a whole. They did all the assessments that I needed and determined that I was blessed to receive the diagnosis of Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid condition, fibromyalgia, and chronic fatigue. And words that changed my life.
And you hadn't been diagnosed with that before?
I had been told I had some sort of thyroid condition going on. I had been told I had this thing called fibromyalgia, but I was told to go home and deal with it.
Oh.
There was no pathway. I was given a pill. I was given, go home and take this pill, it'll make you better. Fibromyalgia is exercise and antidepressants.
And so what was different with the feedback from the Mayo Clinic?
I think it was probably the biggest wake-up call of my life. After 7 days of sitting with multiple doctors, I sat in this room. I get emotional thinking about it because I sat on the bed across from the doctor, and he looked at me and he said, if you waited a year, you probably wouldn't be here. Your body was living in a state of chaos. Your body is living in a state of chaos. And there's words I need you to hear loud and clear. He said, there is no you without you. There is no you without you. I need to say that loud and clear because he said, you are running around this world, giving everybody every ounce of you, and there is nothing left for you. Your bucket is empty.
You know, I have to say, my mom suffers from a similar situation where the holidays, for example,
Yeah.
she gives so much
I know.
and then crashes.
That's right.
And now because she's retired, she has the opportunity to take that time to rest.
Yep.
But I can only imagine what that would be like with a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a full-time job.
Yep.
Multiple medications and their side effects. So that was a profound statement that the doctor made. And,
Yep.
you know, I think that my background in healthcare makes me want to do a whole podcast on the
I know.
system piece of this, like what your mom does too.
I agree.
But that we'll park that for another day. So
Yeah.
what? So, because you'd heard some of these diagnoses before, but this was different.
Yes.
So
It was, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Yeah,
you.
no, just
It
what
was
next?
different because what he said next was profound. You can go home and do the same thing tomorrow as you're currently doing now, and you will not be here in a year. Or you can go home, quit your job, put all the effort into you that you give away to others, and shift your entire life.
Wow, can you say that again? Just so
You can
'cause-
go home and do the same thing that you're doing and give all of you away to others and be the top national trainer and be this and be that. Or you can go home, quit your job, and take all of what you give to others and invest in you and see what happens.
How many doctors tell their I can't even imagine a doctor being so bold as to tell somebody they need to quit their job.
Yeah, well, and I remember, I don't know, I say, he said exactly those words. He may not have said exactly quit your job, but he was very clear on the fact that if I maintained the life that I had, I wasn't going to make it. I really was in that chronic state of stress and burnout and I was dying on the inside. And, when I left there, because the other piece of what he said, and before, I don't want to move on from that, but the other piece that he said, which was really profound, is the word mindfulness. And that was a word I'd read a lot about. And I'm going to say this really, because it's a really important thing. There are so many things we read. And just because we read it doesn't mean we implement it.
Or even really get it.
Or it's great to know everything. I'm a big knower of things, but knowing and doing are profoundly different. So when he said this mindfulness concept, I was very clear to say, I don't do mindfulness. I don't do meditation. I don't even know how to do that. And I remember him sitting there saying to me, well, you've got to find a way. I said, I'm a AAA personality here. Like, how am I going to go home and do that? And he said, well, you've got to find a way to do that. But he also said the word exercise. And at the time, I was doing CrossFit, which was an overdrive exercise. So every day that I did it, despite the fact it was workout, it was so overdrive. And with my body already in stress, I was pushing it well beyond a limit that I really shouldn't have been, right? And that's what fears me of people today with exercise. I work out 6 days a week. Okay, great. But you're also living in stress and overdrive. So now we're beyond pushing. So he asked me to consider an exercise that was a little bit easier on me. So then I came home and chose yoga.
And that there's a lot of breath work in that.
Present moment.
Yeah.
And you can see my face because when I went into this hot yoga studio, I was like, I don't know. I don't know about this. Like, but I knew that it combined everything that I needed to achieve, right? I think leaving the Mayo Clinic that day, and if you were to speak to my mom, I took everything he said to heart the day that I left. I was so scared of what he said that day that I did go home and I went on leave. I took leave. I showed up at that yoga studio scared shitless, and I embraced this concept of mindfulness, of meditation, of present moment.
It's interesting because I have a cousin who's a naturopath.
Yeah.
And I once asked him if yoga counts as exercise. And, there are so many different types. So yin is very just, rest on a pillow. But power yoga is more of a serious workout. But he said something really interesting, which is really resonating with what you've just said, which is, he said, for me, it is what I need because I don't want to say hyper. I'm not diagnosed as hyper or anything, but I'm definitely type A.
Yeah.
Go, 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 like to be productive. And it's almost like an energy. Like if this is your energy, then your exercise might need to calm that down. You can still be raising your heart rate, exercising your muscles, but it's beneficial to calm some of that energy down a little bit.
Yeah.
And you were already going and needed that calm. So how did it feel after you did your first yoga session?
Well, I don't know. How did it feel? I think it was a real mindset flip for me because what you just said is so relevant. I am a hardcore workout person, right? And so for me to all of a sudden be meditating and mindful and using this yoga as a form of exercise, it took a lot for me to shift my thinking, right? It really did. And I was scared because then you go in this room with these yogis who are brilliant, who put their bodies in this different way. And they're so, so then you go in and a whole other set of things take over, this comparison, this, I'm not good enough to be here. There's so many things. But again, what I love about yoga is that it took me to a place of mindfulness where I recognized that the more I was present, the better my yoga became. So I started learning these tools. Okay, if I can be present, that stance of tree pose will become more solid. Right? If I breathe different, I will be able to stand different.
It's fascinating because when I think of people who do CrossFit, I think of the uber exercise, like they're super fit. As somebody who has done yoga for a really long time, I would look to a CrossFitter and go, oh my goodness, like I can't even imagine some of the things that they're able to do. But it is humbling. My husband's more of a workout guy. When then I try to get him to do something in yoga that involves multiple muscles and balance and a bit of stretching at the same time, it's challenging. It's also challenging different parts of your brain. It's asking you to breathe in a certain way. And I think requesting that you be more mindful. I'm curious, though, how did your family react to the diagnosis from the Mayo Clinic?
Well, I think the hardest part of the diagnosis for my family was the fact that they felt like it wasn't an official diagnosis, right? This term fibromyalgia is a term that there's a lot of conflicting evidence around, right? And so does it mean that you have something wrong? I believe it does. But I think that for so many, there's this feeling of, because it's not an official, I don't know how to say this, but like Hashimoto's, we really don't look at it in a way that is an actual disease or diagnosis. Does that make sense? So
is it like a diagnosis of exclusion? Like, since you don't have those other things that
yeah, I like the way you just said that. Yeah, so it's not really it's a diagnosis of inclusion. I really like the exclusion. See, let's get this right. Yeah, see, I don't even know that way, but all I know is that I came home and my family was extremely supportive of what I needed to do. And there's a huge blessing in that, because quitting your job is not an easy task. And taking a step back and becoming a mom and a person who puts this effort into myself is not something I ever imagined I would have to do. So, that was a big eye opener for so many of us. But I had the support, but it was definitely a conflicting diagnosis that caused some challenges, even for myself, because, not knowing of exactly what was going on, but knowing I didn't feel good, and I guess the other thing was not having a pill to solve the problem. I wanted a pill to solve the problem.
So part of what I'm hearing is it wasn't, because some of the diagnosis was the same as what you had been diagnosed with before. What was so powerful, it sounds, was the prescription.
That it was.
You were prescribed
no more meds.
A lifestyle change.
Yeah.
And no more meds. So
no more meds.
They asked you to stop the medications?
Well, they asked me to pull back on them, right? So I think the greatest gift that I've learned about medicine, and, for a long time, if I have spoken about medicine in the past, about, antidepressants and, how they are a great choice, but important to have not on lifelong. And I haven't always talked kindly about antidepressants, but here's what I'll say. And this is one of the things that they mentioned to me. A medicine is a tool. Yeah. A tool to learn new tools. And then once you learn new tools, you come off the medicine. Right? So every medicine was a tool. So what his ask of me was to start pulling back those medicines and start finding new tools through the mindfulness, through the way I was now going to make a choice to live, through being more present and actually getting myself out of that cycle of change, right? And that cycle of pain.
So I think that is a wonderful place to end this session, because I know it. You talked a bit at the beginning what the purpose of the podcast was.
Yeah.
But getting out of that cycle and hearing about how other people have also leveraged other tools in their toolbox for healing is the purpose of the podcast.
Well, I'd like to leave it at that. And I love that sum up, because again, I started this conversation with, I have lived a life of science. Yeah. I have lived a life of taking a pill to get better. And this entire journey has been an unraveling of all that I knew and an empowering of all that I didn't know. And what that's brought me is to this place of presence and abundance without pills, with one pill a day, with no antidepressants, and a life that, like you said, I'm learning so many people have embraced and found healing journeys that have blown my mind, different than medicine. But it's also allowed me to empower myself to a place of healing and learning and understanding of humans that I didn't know that I could get to. And it's why I am sitting here with you and why I want to do the Nancy Perspective, because there are so many choices that we don't know. And that sickness or that burnout or that moment in time that you're flowing through right now that you feel like is a hit in the head is actually a huge opportunity.
Perfect. And so in part 2, I think we'll talk about what happened after the hit in the head.
I love that. All right, stay tuned for part 2. Welcome back to part 2 with my incredible friend Melicent. I feel really blessed to be sitting with you. Our journeys have certainly evolved to sitting in this moment and feeling a lot of gratitude for the fact that you are helping me get right here, right now, and helping me empower my story through this discussion. I don't know that I could stand up and do this alone. So thank you for doing this with me.
Well, it's such a privilege. I think your story is really inspiring. It's inspiring to me, and I know it will be to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Just one of the things that you touched on in part 1 was how the doctors prescribed alternate
Yes.
solutions or
Modalities?
modalities
Yeah.
to treatments.
Yes.
Alternate treatments for the challenges that you were facing.
Yeah.
Alternatives to pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they aren't science-based.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's an important point. This isn't about, the podcast isn't about alternatives to pharmaceuticals and science. It's alternatives that people have explored, and there is some science behind, especially mindfulness. Harvard has studied that. Did you, knowing your background and being very research focused, did you look into that when you were told to try these things? No,
because I was only, I grew up with I grew up with a mom who was a nurse. So I grew up in a world, and I'm going to speak almost, Joe Dispenza's language, Greg Braden, for those of you that don't know these guys, epigenetics, there's a lot of new scientific discoveries, and I'm going to speak their language because I think it's really important. I was taught that our physical body requires physical medicine. Okay? But our bodies are mind, body, and spirit. We are whole, okay? So when we're using physical medicine to heal the physical body, we're not healing the body and the spirit. And so in learning that, and I think the first book that I picked up when I came back, because I started reading a lot and starting to try to understand why I was where I was. And I think that's when I started to pick up this evidence, because despite the fact I believe in what I believe in now, my brain is very logical and scientific as well, right? So this was a change in my mindset and an opportunity that I had. So when I started to go home and read these things, I started to understand, wow, what if we're more than just a physical body? What if doing this, this thing called mindfulness that they've deemed important, what if we change our mind and that impacts our bodies to shift, right? And that's something that I didn't sit with a doctor and he explained. That was something that I started to hear, and I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And I want to make an additional point, because mindfulness and, exercise, movement, I call it, I refer in my book as the 3 M's, but there's an element that I do want to touch on. I don't want to go into too much, of it, because there's a lot of debate about it, but it's marijuana. Because when I was on those 10 pills a day and came back, somebody within my realm said, have you tried marijuana for pain? And I was like, no way. Like, I grew up in a world where that was a no. I would smell it and I would judge. So I was very closed off to that. And that's another piece that I started to embrace and started to be open to, and not in the way that we know it as, smoking full joints, sitting there stunned and high, but in a way that was for medicinal purposes. And, that totally shifted everything for me.
It's fascinating that we can be socially okay with 10 pills.
Yeah. Or a bottle of wine at 4:00 every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet do you think there's still stigma?
I do. I think, even the fact that I'm prefacing that I'm speaking about this tells me there's still stigma, In COVID, I'll never forget it. I mean, the hardest hit to my soul was when COVID happened and they shut the NSLCs down, and I had to stand in the line with the cannabis line.
What's the
NSLC is the liquor corporation. So where you go to get, you can get medicinal weed through other ways. But for me, I just would go to the NSLC or the liquor corporation, I guess, to get my weed. But there were two lines, the alcohol line and the weed line. And my gosh, standing in that line, everybody looked at you. And I stood out because I looked different than everyone else. Or I'll say this differently. Maybe that was a judgment of myself. Right? That was an opportunity for me to shift. So yes, there is still stigma. I stand firmly behind the reason that my change has been so profound is because I was so open to the fact of trying these new things and really being open that even when that marijuana, I'm a micro doser, so a couple of puffs here and there, and I rarely smoke anymore. So again, tool till I didn't need it. Yeah. But, being open to these things really helped me shift and change and grow. But again, also made me lose everything because marijuana is not something that people love. That smell stinks. Yeah. My kids smelt it. We called it medicine in my home, but you can imagine how I felt walking in smelling and feeling that feeling, like very icky for me, but also I use all of that as opportunity, right?
And because there are alternate forms.
Yes.
Is there a reason you were smoking?
Yeah, so there's a lot of scientific evidence to say that for people with PTSD, and that was, what I experienced in my life, and I think we all go through some level of that. There is this, and if I'm wrong, show me, but I think there's a lot of scientific evidence to show that the best way to receive marijuana with PTSD is through smoking because it impacts that blood-brain barrier. Like it breaks through that barrier. It's the only form that breaks through that, right? In taking the pill or in swallowing, we're now working with our blood or we're working with our digestive system. And if it's not functioning, which mine wasn't, then it really doesn't have an impact, right? You have to think about survival. When we live in survival, nothing in our body works properly. The first thing to shut down is our digestive system.
Interesting.
Right? We're running from a bear. You're not going to be sitting there digesting food.
Interesting.
Right? So these are things. So in survival, your body, the way that we're supposed to live is we're supposed to run from the bear and be safe. But in our world today, we're running from a bear every single day because our bodies aren't built for the capacity that we are being asked to receive. So we are all living like we're running from a bear. And when we're running from a bear, our body turns off signals. It's why people have stomach issues. It's why people have GERD, that lump in your throat right now. It's why all of us are walking around unwell because our bodies are living in running from a bear.
Wow.
Right? So that marijuana allowed me, and again, 2-3 puffs, not running from a bear. And then I used that marijuana differently than others to meditate. And
so you did take on meditation.
I did. And so
is that
I
part
will,
of the 3 M's?
It is. And I will say, I will fully admit that learning how to meditate, there was this app. I don't know what it was called, but you could compete with people. And because I was a competitor, I put it in, my girlfriend and I were doing it, and I was doing like an hour of meditation a day just to beat her.
I mean, I've heard about competing, people who my husband has a cycling app, and he really likes to compete against himself and against his friends, but to compete in meditation seems a little counterintuitive.
Well, but it worked. And I think, the one thing I'll say as we're chatting, and I think it's really important to hear, so many of us are running around feeling the way I'm feeling or I was feeling. And we think it's this big pathway, right? We think we need to quit our job. We think we need to do this big thing. But I think the realization that I had, and so many of us have, is so many of us are really good at work. We're really successful at work. And we learn all these tools at work to thrive, to work with humans, to look after ourselves, but we don't take them home.
Yes.
We don't use it on ourselves. So when I was asked that day to take it and flip it, all I did was write down my core competencies of what I was really good at. And then I started using them on myself.
Did you give yourself a review?
I did give myself a review, but the review happens weekly for me, right? And I think that's what I want to get to is this change started in 2015. It is 2024. Every single day I'm waking up to a different human. Because every day I'm doing something different to change. It never ends.
Now, I don't want to gloss over a comment that you made earlier, which was you said that you lost everything.
I did lose everything. Yeah.
And what does that mean?
So when I came back from the Mayo Clinic, I had to become a very different person because I had to embrace these concepts that I didn't even know were available, but I didn't even know how. And so that AAA personality that was very driven for success and money and power over time became a person that is not that at all. This person that doesn't want the success of the big job, the person that wants success of a whole human approach, the person that loves to meditate, the person that's okay to sit on the couch and rest. And I'm going to admit...
That's a tough one for a type A.
Well, I'll tell you, I can't believe I'm about to admit this, but the person who sits and watches the show Superstore, if you have not watched it, you might judge me for watching it, on loop. I finished season 6 and I started again. And I just keep going. And if you don't know the show, it's the most mindfulness, what's the word? Mindless?
Mindless.
Silliest. My mother can't even watch it. She will be embarrassed that I'm talking about it. But I sit and watch this show and it just makes me laugh. And so,
have you seen Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
The same type of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's this person that I became is not the person that I was. And so this gap became so big that I had to literally walk away from my marriage, my career path, my life choices, who I was, who I thought I wanted to be, and be open to what was being shown to me, be open to this thing called uncertainty, be open to the fact that maybe understanding everything is not the way to go, because if we are open and if we are willing, there are things that we can do as human beings to empower something that I didn't even know was out there at all. And so it's why I sit here today, because I had to lose everything. And I'm not just saying once, over and over and over. If you know, I started this podcast a year ago, and in January, I stopped it all because I had another moment where I wanted to sit on the ground and not get up and be open to the fact that I had no idea what was coming, but I had to sit in that. And again, continue doing the work, continuing realizing that I know nothing, and continuing being open. And I will tell you, it's led me down paths that some people think I'm weird and wacky, but I love wholeheartedly who I've become as a result.
You know, I think the word uncertainty will probably resonate for a lot of people. And I am one of those, I think we have a lot in common.
Yeah, we do. It's why we have a mom that is of similar nature.
And I had done one of those like personality assessments over probably 2 decades ago now.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it basically said that I'm great with change.
Yep.
I'm terrible with uncertainty. And I lived with this branding for so long that it wasn't until recently a coach said to me, "Did you really have certainty in your job?"
Yeah.
And I realized that the constant restructuring and stress was another version of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so is it possible that taking a chance on yourself,
Yeah.
You're just experiencing a different kind of uncertainty if you acknowledge that before was uncertain? It sounds like you changed uncertainty in your, you had certainty at work, but uncertainty at home.
Yeah.
In your health.
Yep.
And now you flip that where you have more certainty in your health as you go along this journey, less certainty in how you're going to tackle the work part, because you've done different things. Do you want to speak a little bit about your journey over the last few years?
I do, but I want to come back to what you're talking about.
Okay.
What is certain in our world?
Death and taxes.
The sun comes up, the sun comes down, goes down.
Yeah.
I'm big on words now, right? So I think a powerful awareness for me in this journey has been the words we speak, become the energy of who we are. I know this is going to sound very wacky, but become the hormones of our bodies, become who we are in health, wealth, abundance, and energy. I know that's a lot to unravel.
Yeah.
But what we think and what we feel become who we are.
I mean, I think they taught that to children in school sometimes. Did you ever have to do that exercise where you hold up your arms?
Yes.
And you say negative things, and
That's
somebody
right.
can push your arms down easily.
That's right.
Versus, so, it doesn't sound too wacky to me.
Well,
but I think people forget that or haven't internalized that.
Because society, from the age, and I'm speaking about epigenetics, but from the age of 0 to 8, what we learn in that age is really what we carry for the rest of our lives and who we become, right? 0 to 8 is such a pivotal time in human beings' lives, but it also is a time in our lives where we're almost, I don't know if I can get the right word, but hypnotized by who we're around, because our brain sits in such a state of taking things in. But the reality of that is what we learn in those ages from 0 to 8 is who we are for the rest of our lives. That programming plays out for the rest of our lives in everything we do. So you're right that we've learned all these concepts as kids of, that negative arm thing, but there's so much truth of it. But then society takes over and says, you got to get a job, you got to do this, you got to do that. And we close all that down, but we forget that those things are really important, right? So when I hear the word, does that make sense?
It does. One thing that I have always wondered, and I welcome your thoughts on this, is, what if 0 to 8 wasn't great for you? Are you stuck in some programming for the rest of your lives, or can you reprogram yourself?
Yeah, so stuck is a choice, right? So when I spent 4 years, leaving the Mayo Clinic, I did mindfulness, I did meditation, I did exercise, but I did intense counseling, tapping. I learned, tapping techniques to help me get over it. I embraced hypnotherapy, past life regression, Reiki, and breath work. So I've done all of these different modalities to bring myself back here. And I know I just threw that in, but I think what's important to know, and I forget where I was going. Remind me of your question. I lost sight of it.
Can we reprogram?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And thank you for saying that again. But we as humans have powerful choice. And my point of what I've went through is in one of my mindset coaches that I worked with, I'd get on the phone with him and, my 0 to 8 was great, but I also had a lot of trauma, not to judge my family, but divorce and pain and moving, all of those traumas are still my traumas. And so my 0 to 8 did have a bunch of things raveled into it starting at the age of 2. And so every time I got on the phone with my mindful coach, he would say, the word is choice, Nancy. You're sitting here blaming others, but you are an adult now and you have this thing called choice. So yes, you can reprogram your brain. And in doing that, you do it through different modalities of no longer allowing that emotion to have power on you. So what do I mean by that? So if we take time with a therapist to work through an emotion so that it no longer triggers us, that changes the way we feel. I've been a firm believer of therapy for a long time, but I will tell you in this last year, as I have found breath work, I am a huge believer in the power of breath work, because with breath work, now you've got your body moving through energy of breath, but you actually don't need to know what you're trying to change.
Really?
So you don't actually have to think about it or talk about it, because for me, what I've realized, the more we talk about something, the more it's like our brain does it over and over and over again. So our body and our mind are actually going through that same issue over and over when we talk about it.
So you've mentioned oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. But when we do breath work, we're not having to think about what it is, but now we're moving it and creating space. And when we open our body to create space, we create the opportunity for change. And that change is when we can become aware that we don't want to carry that pattern. We can make a choice to consciously know, oh, there's that pattern again. Let's reprogram. And over time, all of a sudden, you become very different.
So you mentioned a few of the
I've
things
mentioned a lot of things, and I
you-
hope I didn't overwhelm people, but it's been quite the journey.
Well, and so my hope and my assumption is that maybe you will delve into some of those things.
I will.
In future episodes of the podcast.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just in the last few minutes,
Yeah.
you had this diagnosis, more importantly, this prescription
Yes.
of basically changing your life.
Yeah.
And you went ahead and did that.
Yes.
What drove you to write the book?
I think from the time that I was a little girl, I would lay in my bed and dream of the moment that I got to sit, I know this is crazy, with Oprah.
Oh, wow.
I've always said to my mom, I'm on stage, I'm helping people. And I had no idea, and I thought I was singing. I remember, and it's funny, I love to sing. I think I could be a lead band. I don't know where that comes from, and I thought it was singing. But I can tell you, as I went through this journey, I had this wake-up call that I was supposed to share this journey, because as I've shared it, and as I've become more vulnerable and open, I've realized I'm not alone in what I've been feeling. And as I woke up to that, and, this last 10 years, if you know me, I share a lot. I've been very open. I've cried, I've yelled, I've screamed, I've said fuck this and fuck that over and over. I was even Nancy fucking Seibel, Nancy fucking full of love, because I just wanted to get people to know they're not alone in what they feel. And I think I've woken up, you'll notice I don't swear as much anymore. You'll notice I'm a different person. And again, I evolve as often as I do. But I wanted to write this book, and I wanted to do this because I want you to know you're not alone.
And what's the title of the book?
Listen to your fucking heart. The fucking
Okay,
still
you
needs
kept
to
it
stay
there.
in it. Yeah. The fucking needs to stay there, because I really need people to become aware that words are powerful, and words like the word fuck can empower a whole lot of everything and a whole lot of nothing all at the same time. And you'll notice when I say it, it's never from a place of anger. It's only if I stub my toe. If I stub my toe, my kids make fun of me. It's a whole lot of those words over and over, but it's very little from a place of anger and more from a place of I need you to hear me. I've written the book, I've done the podcast because I need you to hear that if someone is telling you something certain, it is not certain. It is only certain if you want to choose to embrace that word. As I said, and I really don't know that I finished the thought, but I will. Words are powerful. And if you think by controlling you're getting certainty, you are fooling yourself. There is nothing certain in this world. There is nothing more important in this world than you. The more you invest in you, the more you grow you, the more you put you first and start saying no and unraveling people pleasing. and unraveling the bullshit that society has taught us that is right, and recognizing you are the only person that matters. I know that sounds selfish, but the minute you embrace that, you become selfless, because you open this beautiful thing that I have so much joy for, that everyone has, and that means everything to us, and it's what the world needs right now, which is unconditional love. And I will make one thing certain. Everything I speak about in the Nancy perspective comes back to love, comes back to energy, and comes back to healing. It doesn't come back to pills. It doesn't come back to, the things we thought were normal and the burnout and the working our asses off to be successful. It comes back to this beautiful thing called love and the opportunity that we have and a belief that something else is up there. Whatever it is for you, something else is up there and you're never alone. And the choices that we make. And I think now more than ever, I want what I do and who I am and what I preach to be that and to give you that opportunity.
Well, thank you. I really have appreciated the opportunity to have this chat with you.
Me too.
To be on your first 2 episodes of your podcast and hear your story again. It's so inspiring. You've talked about a lot of different modalities. I imagine they'll be featured on upcoming episodes of the podcast.
Yeah.
So what's next?
My first guest is the reason that I sit here today, as abundantly healed as I am. I mentioned breath work. Sherry and Lana are 9D breathwork facilitators here in Nova Scotia. If you don't know what that is, we'll learn about it next time. But what's important to know is these women are going around empowering this breathwork and healing so many, including themselves, from brain tumors and from things that we could never imagine they are doing today. And my first guests are going to be here in studio with me talking about the incredible journey that they've had and the opportunity we all have with breathwork.
Well, I'm so looking forward to
Me too. Me too. And Sherry is Lana's sister, and she is a whole pile of joy, but she speaks her truth in a way that sometimes you want to turn around and run the other way. So I'm even more excited to have her on as well.
And just in case there are any lawyers on the call,
Yeah.
I imagine that none of what you've said today is
Yes.
a substitute for medical advice.
It isn't. It isn't. Life is a journey and a choice. And when you get to a place where you really don't know what's next, it's funny how we embrace everything. And that is what I want to give you. Everything and every opportunity to grow and heal and change. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this with me today. It
Thank
means
you.
so much that you came out.